everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Kayla and it's time to crack into a good book. So today's video is going to be a weekly update. I'm really behind on filming videos, I know, and also responding to comments, so sorry about that. Basically, I've been kind of having some booktube related struggles, I guess, but also I just started my new job and that's kind of been more exhausting than I had really anticipated, so I think it's just, hopefully you'll just bear with me as I try to get used to this and figure out I guess my schedule in terms of filming and editing and everything like that, if I can handle it. So, I guess all of this is to say, my posting may be a little bit irregular, but I'm hoping to get back to regularly posting, twice a week. But yeah, it just may take a little bit, and I don't know. We'll see how it goes. But anyway, so I have 8, I think, books to talk to you about today. So this is not the, highest rated batch of books. So some of this just may be my mood, and I'm not really sure. But before we get started, leave some sort of time-related emoji in the comments to let me know that you're here. So we'll actually start with a book that I DNF'd, and that's How to Talk to a Goddess and Other Lessons in Real Magic by Emily Croy Barker. I did receive this for review from the publisher through NetGalley, and this came out at the end of June. So this is an adult, I would describe it as a portal fantasy, and it's the sequel to the Thinking Woman's Guide to Real Magic. So Nora, our main character, is back in grad school in the real world and needs to just forget about her adventures in the other world. But when she has a chance to go back to this other world, she takes it so that she can continue her magical education. So I was really excited to read this. I read the first one years ago when it came out, which I think was 2013, so it's been a while, but I remember really loving it. And my memories, I guess, of what actually happened in that book were a little hazy, so some of this book was okay, let's try to remember what, had happened. But I was just so disappointed and frustrated with this installment to the point where I was I have to put this down. Basically, I think the writing seems a lot more simplistic, and it almost seems more poorly written compared to the first book, which is odd, but I could overlook this if not for the fact that there were a lot of other issues that I had with this book. For instance, I thought that Nora, the main character, seems so much more dumb than before, and she just makes a lot of really poor, not well thought out decisions. She also keeps flip-flopping back and forth on these major beliefs and choices that she makes. There's a really cringy romance, which was weird because I seem to remember this particular plot thread being pretty decent in the first book, but now I'm just I really don't like the situation it sets up. Spoiler alert, here, I'll put my hand up while I briefly mention this in case you want to read it, but she essentially sleeps with this guy, but then is super cruel to him and really regrets it, and it's okay, I get having regrets, perhaps, but this just felt really abrupt and out of character, so I was this just, I hated all of it. There was some explanation as to why this happened, but I still just didn't like it at all. That's the end of the brief spoiler, I guess, but there's also things like slut-shaming and this sort of attitude of women don't know their own minds, and so I just really didn't appreciate that. There's also a lot of rants against organized religion, and this was odd because I'm not particularly religious myself, but it was just so over the top and out of place that I was I just really don't want to read about this. This is uncomfortable, I don't enjoy this. So basically, I didn't really have a good time with what I had read, and I didn't want to force myself to finish the book, even though I had read about half of it. So, honestly, I kind of regret picking this up because it almost ruined how I felt about the first one, and it makes me question my memories of, was the first one really as good as I thought it was? So, yeah, I would not suggest picking this one up, unfortunately. It really didn't work out well for me, but, back in the day, I really did love the first one, so I guess do with that as you will. So now we'll move to some 3-star books, and the first one I'll talk about is Bitch Please by Aguirre. So I received this for review, also from the publisher through NetGalley, and this comes out September 7th. So this is, I guess, an adult paranormal romance, though I would probably say that it's more romance with some paranormal elements than what I typically consider as paranormal romance. But anyway, so we follow Danica, who is a witch, and she runs a magical tech repair shop, and we also have Titus, who's a human who runs a bakery. So Danica and Titus are really drawn to each other, but Danica's family doesn't love mundane, so, humans who don't have magic, and Titus is seemingly cursed to be forever alone. So this was cute, but it just was not as good as I had hoped for. Basically, it, like I had mentioned, kind of like this paranormal romance versus romance with paranormal elements. I think I typically expect paranormal romance to have some sort of plot. Like with romance books, you know, there's generally some sort of plot, obviously, but you kind of, it's more focused on the relationships. And I think paranormal romance, like obviously it does have a lot to do with the relationships, but it seems to be more of like an underlying plot-driven type of genre, I guess. I don't know if I'm explaining myself well, but essentially there was not much of a plot here other than them trying to be together. And I just really had expected a lot more, and especially with like explanations of things and actions. Like there's a couple of mysteries and curses that are mentioned, but then they're just explained in a line or two instead of really delving deeper into these things like I had anticipated. So I was just kind of bummed about this. Like I just wanted more in this world. I think the pacing was all right. It's certainly really easy to read, and I would describe it as kind of like this fluffy type of feeling. And I really do like this idea of the witches and how Danica and her cousin Clem both have powers over technology. I think this is really fun, and I like that they ran a repair shop. We don't get a lot of explanation about how the magic works, or, you know, there's really much of an explanation of like the different types of magic. There are a few mentioned, but it doesn't really go into a whole bunch of detail. So I do also like the Coven of Witches, and they kind of have it set up as like a little book club. And there's actually a recommendation in there for Empire of Sand by Tasha Suri, which I loved, since I was like, yay, this is super fun. Kind of on that note, like you can clearly tell that it's set in the real world, and there are actually some like allusions to coronavirus. It's not explicitly mentioned by name, but you can tell what it's referring to. So just, I guess, be aware of that in case that, you know, is something that triggers you. I think in terms of the characters, Danica was pretty good overall. She's really sassy and confident. I think this book does have a lot to deal with, you know, her dating a mundane and how her family reacts to this, because some of her family members think that they can only marry other pure-blooded witches. So I think there's a lot of good discussions here about, like, one, realizing that some people just aren't as nice as they actually seem, and I think it also examines this beliefs, you know, that you can only marry people of similar backgrounds, and I think there's some really great discussions there. Clem, her cousin, I honestly really didn't like her all that much because I don't think she's as supportive of Danica as I expected, being best friends, and I thought that she didn't really care about Danica's happiness. So I was really frustrated with her and her actions, and like just really thought she could be better. So Titus, our male main character, is a bisexual virgin, and he's alright. Like, I liked that he was a baker. All of that seemed really cute and wonderful. He definitely has some really clingy and possessive behavior, though, and I didn't love how he immediately jumped to thinking about marrying Danica and how many kids they'd have when he first met her. Like, that seemed really excessive to me. So I did like his bond with his sister. I think, you know, they do have some terrible family members. In particular, his dad quickly moves on after Titus's mom died, you know, like prior to events in the book. So I think it's good to explore this idea, and I think Titus kind of realizes he's being a little bit harsh with his dad's new family. The romance itself was alright, you know, like I could definitely feel the chemistry between them, but it felt kind of insta-lovey, right, like I was talking about with Titus. And I just wasn't really fond of how they talked to each other. It just kind of felt awkward at times. So basically, this was a very average read for me. Like, it was a very fun premise, but I just wanted so much more from it. So, you know, in terms of recommending this, like, I think if you go in perhaps with the right expectations, you would enjoy it a lot more. This is one that I think some people will enjoy, and if you're interested in this idea of like this fluffy romance with, you know, some witches and this magical tech repair shop and, you know, a fun baker love interest, like, then sure, pick it up. But other than that, you know, I did want a bit more from it, and I don't know if I will be continuing with the series. The next book I'll talk about is a 3-star book, Among Thieves by MJ Kuhn. So I also received this for review from publisher through NetGalley, and this comes out September 7th. So this is an adult fantasy where we follow Raya, I don't know if I'm pronouncing her name right, who's basically built this reputation as the quickest, deadliest blade in the city, and she's been hunted for the past 6 years by the Guildmaster. So Raya's path leads her to the Guildmaster's stronghold as she's forced to team up with a crew to win her freedom. But turns out, her fellow crewmates have their own plans, though. So I think this was a really interesting idea, but it felt incomplete to me, especially because I think it's supposed to be a standalone. The pacing was pretty good overall, though it does take a bit to get going with, like, the heist-type elements, but I think this does make some sense because, like, obviously you first have to assemble a crew before you can go on the heist. So I liked this world overall, but I think I do have some questions about it and could have used more details. Basically, we have, in terms of, like, magic, there are, like, these adepts and, like, higher individuals. I think they're called disciples, but, like, basically these are people who are kind of enslaved, who have magical abilities. They're kind of soulless almost because their minds aren't really their own anymore. And I thought this was a really interesting idea, but I did want some more details about the different magical abilities and how they really kind of came about. So the story is actually told through multiple points of view and isn't completely focused on Raya and her quest as the synopsis kind of makes it seem. So I actually really enjoyed this as a way of telling the story because you can kind of get a sense of each crew member and their secrets. So each of them has a different skill and attitude and reason for being there. I would absolutely love to get like a background book solely focused on Raya. Again, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, and I'm probably changing how I pronounce it in this review, but that's okay. But anyway, she's known as the Butcher, and she seems like a really badass, bloodthirsty woman. I think I had a lot of questions about her and her like origin story, essentially. I think she's really like foul-mouthed and willing to get her hands dirty. So I really liked seeing this, especially with a female character. Not to say that you don't see this at all, but I think it's much more common to see this type of character being male. We also have, in terms of the other crew members, there's like a captain of the guard type person, and she's much more uptight, but I think she kind of settles into this new company after facing a harsh reality in her life. We also have a master of disguises, a ship captain, and a boy. So I did find it predictable who this boy was, but, based on the clues, but I didn't immediately guess it. It was just sort of like, as I was reading the book, I kind of put things together. Like, okay, I know who this person is, and, turned out it was right. But, yeah, so overall, I thought this was pretty enjoyable, but I did want more from it, especially if it's a standalone. I would definitely be open to reading more in this universe, though, and would recommend it if this premise sounds interesting to you. So now we're going to get into an entire series by Lauren James. So this is... what is the series called? I think it's called The Next Together is the actual series name, but we'll begin with the first book, which is in fact The Next Together. So this is obviously by Lauren James. So this is a YA sci-fi where Catherine and Matthew are born again and again over the centuries, and each time their presence changes history and they fall in love, but are tragically separated. So it's like, why do they keep coming back, and how can they break this cycle? So I think this was a fun concept, though it took a bit to really come together. So we do have several different timelines here. There's a 1745, there's one in the 1800s, there's 2019, and then 2039. And obviously these are multiple timelines throughout history, but we have these same characters. So I liked this mystery of why they keep popping up and, what happened in the 2019 timeline in particular. So this storyline is told with a lot of mixed media. Not to say, there are other mixed media elements with the other timelines, but it's predominantly in the 2019 timeline, I believe. And this particular timeline seems like a lot more nefarious and high stakes, so I really enjoyed that one in particular. The pacing was decent overall, though I think I did feel less engaged at times with some of the timelines. We do have some really interesting sci-fi elements that pop up that were also a bit horrifying. There is definitely some mystery left over as well, which we'll, shortly get to with the second book. But in terms of the characters, I liked Kate and Matthew quite a bit. I think it's fun to discover their purpose in each of the timelines, and I liked seeing the similarities and differences between them and the different timelines. They are the same people, but there are subtle differences, with how they act. Both of them are drawn to each other, but they do face some obstacles with being together. They both want to help, though, and don't shirk the opportunity to save people, and I really appreciated this type of attitude and admired them for, their courage, I guess. So Kate, I think, is generally very bubbly and outgoing. I think, at least in the later timelines, I think some of the earlier timelines, she has to deal with, what's proper. But I really liked her. I thought she was pretty funny overall. Matthew is more, steadfast, I would say. He is, the quieter one, I guess, of the pair, but I really liked his 1745 stuff in particular. I guess I'll just kind of leave it at that because I don't want to spoil things, but I had a really fun time with this book. So now let's jump into the rest of the series. So the next book I'll talk about, which is also 3 stars, is The Last Beginning, also by Lauren James. So this is the sequel to The Next Together, and this is a duology. The other 2 books, I'll talk about some of the short stories momentarily, but it's like the main story is told over this duology. So again, YA sci-fi. But now we're following Clove, who is determined to find out what happened 16 years ago when Kate and Matthew mysteriously vanished. So I think the pacing was actually a bit better than here compared to The Next Together. I liked getting more explanations here and seeing kind of like almost like the backstage version of the story that we knew from the first book. I really liked revisiting some of these timelines, but we also actually have a new timeline, which was awesome and also terrifying. Like, I think this was done really well, and it shows the importance of some of these events that we're visiting. We do also have some mixed media elements here, which is something that I really love, so I was super excited to see that again. We do have some new and returning characters. Now, obviously, the focus is much more on Clove as she investigates what happened to Kate and Matthew. I think she feels really teenagery at the beginning with not really being able to process her emotions all that well and kind of whining a bit and just being like a typical teenager. But I think she becomes a lot more responsible and grown up over the course of the book. I think she realizes that there are, in fact, consequences to her actions and she tries to fix things. So I just really liked seeing her journey with all of this. And I also really enjoyed seeing her thrown into things where, like, she really has no idea what to do and kind of bungles it a bit. We also have Spart, who's a fun AI sidekick. Spart likes to watch TV shows, and this kind of reminded me of Murderbot in that aspect. But Spart is also really helpful and funny. So I don't really want to talk about a lot of the other characters because I don't want to spoil things, but basically I just really enjoyed this duology and liked that it's like different pieces of the same puzzle. There's also references in here to The Loneliest Girl in the Universe, which is somewhere up there, I think. But I read that, I don't know if that was earlier this year or last year, but I really enjoyed it. And I like that there, are references. It's clearly in the same universe. I was like, oh yes, that's a fun little tidbit for me. I would definitely recommend this duology if that premise sounds really interesting to you. I don't think that these are my favorites of Lauren James' books. Like, I think I much prefer, The Loneliest Girl in the Universe and the what was the other one? The Quiet at the End of the World. But these, I'm glad that I read them. This was kind of what I was in the mood for, I guess. So then we'll get into 2 of the short stories to wrap up this entire 4-book universe type thing. So both of these are 3 stars. The first one I'll talk about is Another Together, and this is a short story where we follow Kitty and Matthew as they must stop a murderer at Bletchley Park. And I thought this was actually a really fun murder mystery. It's only 40 pages, so it's pretty fast-paced and obviously does wrap up pretty quickly with finding the murderer because, there's only a handful of pages to do that. But I really liked this concept of trying to save the day again, and in particular trying to save the life of Alan Turing and the other code breakers during World War II. I, again, really liked the setting as well. I think that's a very interesting period of history. And I continue to like Kate, or Kitty as she's known here, and Matthew. They're very good people who want to help out. I liked how smart they are. Admittedly, some of their their investigation is leaves something to be desired, but I really appreciated how they're working as codebreakers during the war. So I really liked this. This was honestly one of my favorite parts of this. You can actually read the story through Lauren James' website. So if you're interested in that, check it out. It can be read, I think, as a standalone because it's just a little mini adventure and can kind of give you a flavor, I guess, of the rest of this story. We'll move on to the other short story, which is Another Beginning, also a 3-star rating for me. So this is a short story set in 1745 where Clove and Ella are maids and they set out to retrieve a historical document from the castle during a siege. So this was a cute story and fun to revisit them, but I don't think this was nearly as exciting as Another Together, but I did like this promise of another adventure. So I liked that they're trying to get a document that's, related to the Library of Alexandria. I think the Library of Alexandria is really interesting, so kind of anything to do with that is fun. I did, however, feel like Clove felt more self-assured here than how she acts in the book in 1745 for whatever reason. Then we also have Ella, who is, again, like this more like fun, spontaneous type of character, but we also get to see her more studious side. But yeah, I feel like this one doesn't fit in quite as well with the events of The Last Beginning, but it's still fun, and like, you know, it's fun to revisit the characters. So like overall with these two books and the 2 short stories, like I had a pretty good time with it. Like clearly I just had a little binge there, so I definitely wanted to keep reading it, and like I said, if you're interested in this premise, I would definitely recommend checking it out. And finally, the last book I'll talk about today is a 4-star book now, finally, and that's Cursed Luck by Kelley Armstrong. So this is adult urban fantasy, and we follow Kennedy, who's a curse worker whose specialty is uncursing and reselling hexed objects. Aiden, who's from a really wealthy family, comes to her with a scheme to get legendary cursed objects, but turns out others are after it too. So Kennedy's sisters end up being kidnapped, and she has to join forces with Aiden. So this was enjoyable, but I don't think it was as immediately gripping to me as the Otherworld series, which I absolutely love. I did like the premise of these curse weavers, though. I think it seems like there's just like a bit of magic in the world, but it's generally like smaller magic, or like, I don't know, it's not like the Otherworld series, I guess, where, you know, you have like werewolves and vampires and things like that. Like, it's smaller magic, but I like feel like it could expand a bit, so, you know, we shall see. I think the pacing was pretty good overall, but I did struggle a little bit to get into the story, like I kind of mentioned, but then I absolutely loved a particular direction it took. I really wasn't expecting this change of pace, and it makes things like so much cooler, and I can't wait to see what happens. I continue to enjoy Kelley Armstrong's writing style. Again, not surprised. I have been reading her books for like forever, it seems, and really enjoy them. She's definitely an auto-buy author for me. I feel like this book almost reminds me of like her Nadia Stafford series, which was like kind of like an assassin type series, but obviously we have a bit of magic here. We also do have a bit of a heist plot, obviously, with trying to retrieve this legendary cursed object. So I thought that was really fun. I liked the action that we get here as well, with Kennedy trying to find her sisters and what happens when they start to investigate this kidnapping and this necklace. The magic, we mostly get to see luck, curse, and dream magic, and I liked how everything has to balance out. Like, what I mean by this is, like, if you uncurse something, then that curse has to go somewhere else, and you have to place it somewhere else. So I think this brings in a lot of strategy with when you should use your abilities, because you're going to have to deal with, like, the fallout, essentially. So I also really liked how curse weaving is different for different people. Like, Kennedy kind of visualizes it as music, but one of her sisters kind of sees it as solving an equation, and I thought that was a fun variety. Kennedy was enjoyable overall. I think she's looked down on compared to her sisters because of her temperament and the fact that she focuses on a particular type of curse known as the Joker's Jinx. Like, it can be more playful, I think, and so I think people don't tend to take it as seriously. She's moved away from her hometown to get away from some painful memories, but I think she kind of realizes that she does in fact need her family. She's very dedicated to rescuing her sisters and is generally kind and helpful. Aiden, of course, we have to mention him. He comes from this very privileged background, and he initially just comes across as a complete jerk, but I really liked getting to know him more. He does help his family, even if they don't necessarily treat him the best, so I think he has a lot of internal conflicts. He's also pretty self-aware, actually, and, like, realizes that he's made mistakes and actually does own up to them, so I really appreciated this attitude. We do have some side characters who are, perhaps more than they seem. I loved learning about them and can't wait to find out more. So I don't want to specifically mention them by name because I think some of the fun of this book is, like, finding out more about these characters. So we don't get to see Kennedy's sisters or Aiden's brother a whole lot, I guess, in the book, but I think we might get to see them more soon. So yeah, this is, unsurprisingly, I had a good time with this book, and I will definitely be continuing this series. I would certainly recommend checking this out. I think she initially did this as like a serial story online, so the second story may be currently happening. I'm not really sure, but I think what I'm going to do is probably wait for it to just, like, come out in the collection, because I think this kind of is, like, edited and polished a little bit more than, what's initially posted online. So I also just like owning these books, so that's my plan. But yeah, definitely recommend checking this out. Those are all the books that I have to talk to you about today. Like I said, a lot of these are kind of more in that middle ground area, you know, excluding the one that I DNF because, yeah, like I said, it could just be my mood or who knows, maybe it is the books. I don't know. Let me know in the comments if you've read any of these books or think you might pick them up. And for your question of the day, I don't really have much, but just like, how is your week going so far? So I do have a Discord channel, and if you want to join that, the link is in the description below. I hope you're all having an excellent day and are reading something awesome. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to give it a big thumbs up, as that would certainly help me out. But with that, I think I'm going to wrap it up here and see you in the next one.